In 2019, Google announced what it called quantum supremacy. The claim was simple but provocative. A quantum computer completed a specific calculation in roughly 200 seconds, while the most powerful classical supercomputers would require around 10,000 years to achieve the same result. Almost immediately, the scientific community responded with skepticism. Critics argued that the comparison was not entirely fair, that classical algorithms could be optimized, and that the problem itself had limited real-world relevance. However, focusing on whether the number is exactly correct misses the strategic signal embedded in the announcement. The importance of that moment was not the benchmark, it was the direction. For the first time, a credible demonstration suggested that quantum systems could outperform classical systems in a domain that is, in principle, unreachable through incremental improvements. This is not Moore's law extended. This is a discontinuity. From a geopolitical perspective, discontinuities matter more than incremental gains. Incremental improvements can be competed through scale, capital, and efficiency. Discontinuities, by contrast, reset the competitive landscape. They introduce new rules, new bottlenecks, and new forms of asymmetry. Quantum computing belongs to this category. It is not simply a faster computer. It is a fundamentally different computational paradigm rooted in quantum mechanics, superposition, entanglement, and probabilistic state evolution. When the boundary of physics becomes a variable, rather than a constraint, the implications extend beyond technology into sovereignty. Historically, whenever a breakthrough redefined what was physically possible, whether nuclear fission or orbital flight, the consequences were not confined to laboratories. They were immediately absorbed into national strategy. Quantum computing follows the same pattern. The reason is structural. Computation underpins nearly every modern system: finance, logistics, defense, communication, and governance. If the rules of computation change, the integrity of those systems changes as well. A state that gains early control over such a capability does not just improve efficiency, it gains the ability to redefine constraints for others. This is the essence of strategic power. Therefore, the correct interpretation of the 2019 announcement is not, quantum computers are already dominant. The correct interpretation is, the negotiation over the limits of computation has begun. And, unlike purely academic debates, this negotiation involves governments, intelligence agencies, and multinational corporations. It is shaped by funding priorities, export controls, talent flows, and industrial policy. In other words, quantum computing entered geopolitics the moment it demonstrated plausibility. The race is not waiting for maturity. It is already in motion. To understand why quantum computing is immediately political, it is useful to place it within a broader historical pattern. Over the past century, several major technological breakthroughs have followed a similar trajectory: an initial scientific discovery, followed by rapid engineering development, and ultimately, integration into geopolitical competition. The first clear example is the nuclear race. The discovery of nuclear fission in the late 1930s quickly transitioned from theoretical physics to military application. The Manhattan Project demonstrated that a scientific breakthrough could translate directly into strategic dominance. Nuclear capability did not merely add a new weapon. It redefined deterrence, diplomacy, and global power hierarchies. The second example is the space race. While often framed as symbolic competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, it was fundamentally about surveillance, missile delivery systems, and technological prestige. Achievements such as satellite deployment and lunar missions carried both practical and psychological significance. Space became a domain where engineering capability translated into geopolitical signaling. The third example is the semiconductor industry. Unlike nuclear and space technologies, semiconductors evolved into a deeply embedded economic infrastructure. Control over semiconductor manufacturing and design capabilities became synonymous with economic resilience and technological leadership. In recent years, export controls and supply chain realignments have made it clear that semiconductors are treated as strategic assets, not just commercial products. Quantum computing can be understood as the next stage in this sequence. However, it differs in one critical aspect. It has the potential to influence the outcomes of all previous domains. Nuclear deterrence relies on secure communication and command systems. Space systems depend on data transmission and encryption. Semiconductor-based economies rely on computational integrity. Quantum computing, by potentially breaking widely used cryptographic systems, introduces a layer of retroactive vulnerability. This is why quantum is not simply the next race. It is a recursive technology. It acts on the very systems that define modern power. If a sufficiently advanced quantum computer can break encryption schemes such as RSA or ECC, then historical data that was previously considered secure may become accessible. Intelligence agencies are already operating under this assumption, engaging in what is often described as, harvest now, decrypt later. Thus, each historical phase can be summarized as follows. Nuclear technology redefined military power. Space technology redefined strategic visibility. Semiconductors redefined economic power. And quantum computing has the potential to redefine computational trust itself. From a strategic standpoint, trust is the foundation of digital civilization. Financial transactions, communication networks, and national security systems all depend on the assumption that encrypted data remains secure. If that assumption is weakened, the entire architecture must be rebuilt. Therefore, the emergence of quantum computing represents not only a continuation of historical patterns, but also an amplification. It introduces a layer of systemic risk and opportunity that spans across all previous technological domains. The development of quantum computing is not driven by a single unified objective. Instead, it is shaped by a complex interaction of actors, each operating under distinct incentive structures. Understanding these incentives is essential to analyzing how the quantum landscape will evolve. The United States approaches quantum computing from a dual perspective, maintaining technological leadership while protecting existing systems. On one hand, the U.S. invests heavily in quantum research through both public funding and private sector initiatives. On the other hand, it must also manage the risk that quantum capabilities could undermine current cryptographic infrastructure, which underpins financial systems, military communications, and global digital services. This creates a tension between innovation and protection. China's strategy is more centralized and state-driven. Significant resources are allocated to quantum communication, where China has already demonstrated notable achievements, such as satellite-based quantum key distribution. In quantum computing, China is still catching up in certain areas, but its approach emphasizes long-term investment, integration with national security objectives, and reduced dependence on foreign technology. The incentive here is clear: technological self-sufficiency combined with strategic leverage. The European Union positions itself as a third pole, emphasizing strategic autonomy. Through initiatives such as Quantum Flagship, the EU aims to coordinate research efforts across member states and build a competitive ecosystem. The challenge for Europe lies in translating research excellence into industrial scale. Its incentive structure balances collaboration, regulation, and the desire to avoid dependence on both US and Chinese technologies. At the corporate level, companies such as IBM, Google, and IonQ operate under a different set of pressures. They must demonstrate progress to investors, develop commercially viable applications, and navigate uncertain timelines for technological maturity. Unlike governments, corporations face quarterly expectations, which can conflict with the long-term nature of quantum research. These four actors, US, China, EU, and corporations, do not share aligned objectives. Governments prioritize security and sovereignty, while corporations prioritize market creation and return on investment. Even among governments, strategies diverge based on political systems, economic structures, and existing technological capabilities. The result is a multi-equilibrium system. There is no single authority defining the rules of the quantum race. Instead, rules emerge through interactions, export controls, research collaborations, talent mobility, and standard-setting processes. This makes the system inherently unstable, but also dynamic. In such an environment, outcomes are not determined solely by technological breakthroughs. They are shaped by how effectively each actor aligns its incentives with execution. A technically superior solution may fail if it lacks institutional support, while a less advanced approach may succeed if it is embedded within a coherent strategy. Therefore, analyzing quantum computing requires moving beyond the technology itself and focusing on the underlying incentive architecture. This is where the real competition takes place. Quantum computing introduces a three-layer transformation to the existing computational economy: destruction, reconstruction, and creation. These layers do not occur sequentially. They overlap and interact, producing complex transition dynamics. The first layer is destruction. At a theoretical level, quantum algorithms, such as Shor's algorithm, can factor large integers exponentially faster than classical algorithms. This capability directly threatens widely used public key cryptographic systems, including RSA and elliptic curve cryptography. These systems form the backbone of secure communication, financial transactions, and digital identity. If they become vulnerable, the consequences extend across virtually all sectors of the economy. The second layer is reconstruction. Recognizing the risks posed by quantum computing, organizations are actively developing post-quantum cryptographic solutions. Institutions such as National Institute of Standards and Technology have been leading efforts to evaluate and standardize algorithms that are resistant to quantum attacks. The publication of initial standards marks the beginning of a large-scale migration process. This migration is not trivial. It involves updating protocols, hardware, software, and operational practices across global systems. The third layer is creation. Beyond disrupting existing systems, quantum technologies enable entirely new applications. Quantum sensing can achieve unprecedented precision in measuring physical phenomena. Quantum communication offers theoretically secure information transfer through principles such as quantum key distribution. Quantum simulation can model complex molecular and material interactions that are infeasible for classical computers. These capabilities open new markets and redefine what is computationally possible. A critical aspect of this transformation is cost allocation. The destruction layer imposes risk, the reconstruction layer imposes cost, and the creation layer offers opportunity. However, these are not evenly distributed. Governments may mandate upgrades, corporations may bear implementation costs, and end users may indirectly pay through higher prices or reduced convenience. This creates an incentive problem. Who pays for the transition? Who benefits from early adoption? Who absorbs the risks of delay? These questions are central to policy and strategy. They influence the speed of migration, the design of standards, and the competitive positioning of firms and nations. Importantly, the transition to a post-quantum computational economy will likely occur before fully capable quantum computers are available. The mere expectation of future capability is sufficient to trigger present-day changes. This anticipatory behavior is characteristic of strategic technologies. Thus, the impact of quantum computing is not confined to a future moment of technological maturity. It is already reshaping decisions, investments, and institutional frameworks today. The quantum race is often discussed in abstract terms, but its trajectory becomes clearer when examined through concrete cases. These cases illustrate that quantum is no longer confined to theoretical research. It is already embedded in infrastructure, policy, and early-stage commercialization. China's deployment of the Micius satellite represents one of the most visible milestones. By enabling quantum key distribution over long distances, it demonstrated the feasibility of space-based quantum communication. More importantly, it signaled a strategic direction. Rather than waiting for fully mature quantum computers, China is building advantage in adjacent domains such as secure communication networks. This reflects a systems-level approach, capturing value where feasibility is highest while continuing to invest in longer-term capabilities. In parallel, corporate ecosystems are forming around cloud-based access. IBM has built a quantum network that allows enterprises and research institutions to experiment with quantum algorithms through cloud interfaces. This model lowers the barrier to entry and accelerates learning cycles. It also creates a form of lock-in. Organizations that build early expertise on a specific platform may become dependent on that ecosystem as the technology matures. On the regulatory side, the United States has taken a proactive stance through the National Institute of Standards and Technology. By publishing post-quantum cryptography standards, it effectively sets a migration timeline for government systems and, indirectly, for the private sector. Standards function as coordination mechanisms. Once defined, they align incentives across industries and create a predictable path for investment. Contrasting these developments, Taiwan's relative absence in the quantum landscape highlights a structural gap. Despite strong capabilities in semiconductors, the lack of visible large-scale quantum initiatives suggests a potential vulnerability. In strategic terms, absence is not neutrality, it is exposure. If quantum technologies redefine security and computation, economies that are not actively participating may find themselves dependent on external providers for critical infrastructure. These cases demonstrate that the quantum race is not a single-track competition. It unfolds across multiple layers: communication, computation, standards, and ecosystems. Each layer offers different entry points and different timelines. Importantly, leadership in one layer does not guarantee leadership in others. The broader implication is that early positioning matters more than immediate returns. Actors are not waiting for quantum computers to become commercially viable. They are investing in capabilities, relationships, and standards that will define the market when it scales. This is consistent with previous technological transitions, where early ecosystem formation often determined long-term dominance. Quantifying the state of quantum computing is challenging due to the gap between theoretical potential and practical implementation. However, several key metrics provide a useful framework for understanding progress and setting realistic expectations. One commonly cited figure is the number of qubits in a quantum processor. For example, IBM Condor reached 1,121 qubits in 2023. At first glance, this suggests rapid scaling. However, raw qubit count alone is not a sufficient indicator of capability. The quality of qubits, measured in terms of coherence time, error rates, and connectivity, is equally critical. Without effective error correction, additional qubits do not translate into reliable computation. This leads to one of the most important benchmarks: the number of logical, error-corrected qubits required for meaningful applications. Estimates suggest that breaking widely used encryption systems, such as RSA 2048, would require on the order of millions of stable qubits. Current systems are several orders of magnitude away from this threshold. This gap reinforces the perception that large-scale quantum disruption is still distant. However, focusing solely on this gap can be misleading. Quantum advantage does not require universal capability. In specific domains, such as molecular simulation, optimization problems, and certain types of machine learning, quantum systems may achieve practical advantages with far fewer qubits. These niche applications can generate early economic value and drive further investment. Market projections reflect this dual reality. Estimates suggest that the quantum computing market could reach approximately $45 billion by 2035. While such figures are inherently uncertain, they indicate that stakeholders expect significant commercial activity well before full-scale quantum computers are realized. Another important metric is investment. Governments and corporations are allocating billions of dollars to quantum research and development. This level of funding signals strategic commitment rather than speculative interest. It also accelerates the pace of progress by attracting talent and enabling large-scale experimentation. The key insight is that uncertainty in timelines does not equate to irrelevance. In strategic technologies, preparation often begins under uncertainty. Organizations that wait for clarity may find themselves at a disadvantage when the technology reaches inflection points. Therefore, the role of quantitative analysis is not to predict exact timelines, but to frame the scale of the challenge and the direction of progress. It provides context for decision-making without creating false precision. Quantum computing introduces a set of strategic implications that extend beyond technical performance. These implications reshape how security, computation, and sovereignty are defined in the digital age. The first dimension is security. Modern encryption systems are designed under the assumption that certain mathematical problems are computationally infeasible for classical computers. Quantum algorithms challenge this assumption. Even before quantum computers reach the capability to break encryption in real time, the possibility of future decryption creates immediate risk. Intelligence agencies may intercept and store encrypted data today with the expectation that it can be decrypted in the future. This harvest now, decrypt later strategy fundamentally alters the threat landscape. The second dimension is the nature of computation itself. Quantum computers are not simply faster versions of classical machines. They operate on different principles and are suited to different classes of problems. This creates a divergence in computational capability. Organizations that understand how to map problems to quantum algorithms may gain disproportionate advantages in areas such as optimization, materials science, and complex system modeling. The third dimension is sovereignty. In a world where quantum capabilities are unevenly distributed, access to quantum computing becomes a strategic asset. States that possess advanced quantum systems may gain the ability to access sensitive information from states that lack quantum-resistant defenses. This creates a new form of asymmetry, where information advantage translates directly into geopolitical leverage. These three dimensions are interconnected. Security vulnerabilities influence policy decisions, which in turn affect investment and research priorities. Computational advantages create economic opportunities, which reinforce technological leadership. Sovereignty concerns drive international competition and collaboration. Importantly, these dynamics are already in motion. Governments are updating security protocols, investing in research, and forming alliances. Corporations are exploring use cases and building internal capabilities. The absence of fully mature quantum computers does not delay these actions, it accelerates them. Thus, the strategic significance of quantum computing lies not only in what it will enable in the future, but also in how it is reshaping behavior in the present. It introduces a new layer of competition, where anticipation is as important as execution. For organizations and policymakers, the challenge is not to predict the exact trajectory of quantum computing, but to make informed decisions under uncertainty. A structured decision framework can help prioritize actions and allocate resources effectively. The first question concerns cryptographic readiness. Organizations must assess whether their current encryption systems are vulnerable to future quantum attacks, and evaluate the cost and complexity of migrating to post-quantum cryptography. This involves not only technical upgrades, but also coordination across systems, partners, and regulatory environments. The second question focuses on dependency. Many organizations rely on cloud service providers for critical infrastructure. It is essential to understand whether these providers have a clear roadmap for quantum security, and how they plan to integrate post-quantum solutions. Dependency on external providers introduces both risk and opportunity, depending on the provider's capabilities. The third question addresses competitive context. Quantum capabilities are not evenly distributed across regions. Organizations must consider the geopolitical environment in which they operate, including the level of investment in quantum technologies by their competitors' home countries. This influences both risk exposure and potential advantage. These questions are interconnected and should be addressed as part of a broader strategic assessment. Importantly, action should not be delayed until quantum computers reach full maturity. The transition to quantum-resistant systems is a long-term process, and early preparation can reduce both cost and risk. Decision-making in this context requires balancing short-term constraints with long-term uncertainty. Investments in quantum readiness may not yield immediate returns, but they contribute to resilience and strategic positioning. Conversely, delaying action may reduce short-term costs but increase long-term vulnerability. Ultimately, the goal is not to achieve perfect foresight, but to build adaptive capacity. Organizations that can respond to evolving technological and geopolitical conditions will be better positioned to navigate the quantum transition. The emergence of quantum computing can be understood as part of a broader narrative about the evolution of computation and its role in global power structures. In previous discussions, we have examined how artificial intelligence enhances execution efficiency, how energy constraints shape the cost of computation, and how control over computational infrastructure translates into sovereignty. Quantum computing integrates and amplifies these themes. It does not simply extend existing capabilities, it introduces the possibility of resetting them. If quantum systems achieve practical maturity, they could alter the balance of power in areas ranging from cybersecurity to economic competition. However, the most important insight is not about the moment of technological breakthrough. It is about the period leading up to it. The competition for position, through investment, research, standard setting, and ecosystem development, is already underway. Actors are making decisions today that will influence their relative standing when quantum technologies become more widely applicable. This dynamic reflects a common pattern in strategic technologies. The window for positioning often precedes the window for widespread adoption. Those who recognize the significance early can shape the rules of the system. Those who react later must operate within those rules. In this context, quantum computing functions as a potential reset mechanism. It challenges existing assumptions, introduces new uncertainties, and creates opportunities for both disruption and leadership. Yet the reset has not yet occurred. The system is still in a transitional phase, where multiple outcomes are possible. Therefore, the critical question is not whether quantum computing will become important. The question is how actors position themselves in anticipation of its impact. Strategic advantage will depend less on predicting the exact timeline, and more on aligning incentives, capabilities, and decisions with the direction of change. In practical terms, this means acknowledging uncertainty while taking deliberate action. It means investing in knowledge, building partnerships, and preparing systems for adaptation. Above all, it means understanding that in a world of accelerating technological change, waiting for certainty is often equivalent to accepting dependency. The race has already begun. The reset button has not been pressed, but the competition to control it is well underway.